The year was 1750. Only 20% of Great Britain's population lived or worked in cities, and the rest in rural communities. Manufacturing was done in people's homes, using hand tools and basic machines. Food and clothing was produced locally, and people worked in villages and small towns, working the land and relying upon the local community to provide for them. Education was deficient and only for the rich. Roads were poorly built and maintained. Goods were transported on river barges, which was a slow and costly task. Transportation was limited to walking or horse-drawn wagons and carriages. London's population was approximately 740,000. Infant mortality was very high, with many babies dying within the first year of life. The annual death rate was 22 deaths per 1,000 people, with people living only 36 or 37 years old. Life in Britain was hard. Things were as they always had been, slow and never changing. But for the next 100 years, Great Britain would go from being one of the lowest in industrialization to be the powerhouse of the Western world, in what is now known as the Industrial Revolution. In 1767, Sir Richard Arkwright developed a spinning machine, which became known as the spinning jenny. Without knowing it, he had brought to the world a machine that would lead directly to the rise of the Industrial Revolution and a new world of manufactured products. This ushered in a shift to powered, special-purpose machinery, factories, and mass production. The Industrial Revolution's roots are found in Great Britain, a nation known for its formidable army and colonial power. Britain had great deposits of coal and iron ore, which proved to be essential for industrialization. Britain also was a politically stable society. Its colonies could function as a marketplace for manufactured goods and source for raw materials. As the demand for British goods increased, merchants needed more cost-effective methods of production, leading to the rise of mechanization and the factory system.
Great Britain was that one powerhouse that kind of just always been there. At this time in history, Britain really was the colonial empire of the world. It had a powerful army and were politically stable. They were missing one thing though, industrialization, which is why it was a surprise when they led the rest of Europe into
The Industrial Revolution brought to Europe a use of new basic materials, use of new energy sources, the invention of new machines, the factory system, better transportation and communication, and science to industry. The central roles of the Industrial Revolution were the iron and textile industries, and perhaps one of the most influential inventions of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine. With the increasing use of the steam engine, the need for coal to run it grew. There was also the inventions of new machines like the spinning jenny and water frame. Transportation became easier through the steam engine, steamboat, and steam-powered train. Communication also became less difficult and much faster through the printing press and telegraph.
It could take 2 weeks for a single letter to travel 100 miles. Transatlantic service would take several months, and no one could be certain that the letter would reach its final destination. There is no such thing as instant communication until the telegraph came out in the 1830s. Before the Industrial Revolution, people traveled either by foot or horse. Eventually, waterways and roads improved, and the train was invented, and it no longer took weeks to reach your destination.
Possibly the most significant but overlooked outcome of the Industrial Revolution is the massive and momentous population explosion. At the dawn of the first millennium AD, human population sat at 150 to 200 million, and 300 million in the year 1000. By the emergence of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1700s, the population had risen 57% to 700 million, and would reach 1 billion by the late 1800s. Why did the Industrial Revolution bring such significant population growth? What caused it? Right away, studies ruled out immigration as a factor. The growth didn't occur from large numbers of foreign workers arriving. Instead, It was found that internal factors such as changes in marriage, improvements in health, and an increase in births most likely had the largest impacts on the population growth. People also began to marry younger, which gave more opportunity for children. More and more people were also getting married than before. The birth rate then rose, causing a small influx in the population. As the amount of births increased, the death rates fell. More people were living longer than they had been in a long time. The Industrial Revolution altered medicine and living standards, making it less likely for people to die from deadly diseases. Famines were less common, and plagues less epidemic. This was the first time in history the cycle of economic surplus, population growth, overpopulation, and famine was broken. In the past, an exploding population wasn't always a benefit, especially to countries that were very poor, often resulting in catastrophic results such as famine and plague, returning the population to a lower level. This increase in population during the 18th century turned out to be quite different. While it did raise demand for food and goods, which helped to spur on the Industrial Revolution, the population growth didn't outrun the growth of economic productivity. Although historians still debate it today, the widely accepted theory of the population explosion during this period is the rise of birth rates and decline of death rates. The population growth left its mark not only on the amount of people living in the world, but also on how these people acted and what they believed. The devastating destruction of the environment is one of the most recognizable effects of the growing population during the Industrial Revolution. The fast industrialization intensified environmental pollution, leading to typical occupational diseases among some trades. By the 1850s, River Thames in London had grown horribly polluted from the dumping of raw human sewage and industrial waste matter into its waters, causing it to have an unpleasant smell and leading to periodic epidemics of cholera and typhus. Dysentery and tuberculosis were also on the rise from the unsanitary conditions of large cities. The famous London fogs of the 1800s were not a natural phenomenon, like some have decided to believe. The yellowish smog had been built up from trapped coal fire smoke, causing respiratory disorders and killing thousands of people each year. Because of the need for vast quantities of coal, oil, gas, ores, and precious metals, these non-renewable energy sources were ripped out of the earth with no regard to the environment. With new machines being let out to the world, carbon emissions from factories and eventually cars and planes were put into the atmosphere. This is widely believed to be the reason for raised global mean temperatures. In time, technology and new regulations restored London's water and air to good health. The environmental havoc caused by rapid industrialization continues across the developing world in the 21st century. This rapid population growth affected much more than just the environment. The Industrial Revolution caused people to work outside of their homes, most of the times in a factory. Adult males were expected to work 12 to 14 hours a day, 5.5 days a week, all year long. Women also began to leave home to work, which had been very uncommon until then.
Women's labor became a commodity to be exploited, and were given the lowest skilled, lowest paying jobs. They were bullied by their bosses and husbands, and were now responsible not only for their jobs, but also for their home life. Women worked for 10 hours in a factory and then went home to work another few hours. At this time, by law, men controlled their families. Women had no social, political, or economical rights outside the home. They couldn't vote or own property. Their value in society was often overlooked, and the Industrial Revolution just enforced that.
Children also began to be heavily exploited by their bosses. They were given dangerous factory jobs because they were smaller than the average adult.
Oftentimes, children were given the job of unjamming the great textile machines that wove cloth. Since their hands and arms were so small, they could reach into the small spaces where fabric would tend to jam. The foreman would not turn the machine off, but would insist the child reach in to dislodge the jam. If he were not quick enough, his hand or arm would become caught in the mechanism, and this could result in severe damage to the child. All laborers, male and female, and children, were eventually looked at as interchangeable parts. Employers valued their machinery more than their employees.
The population explosion also caused a rapid increase in urbanization. Technical developments in farming reduced the need for people to work, so people moved to cities to find work. These cities were not prepared for this huge influx in such a short period of time. Houses were built quickly and cheaply, with back-to-back terrace housing. Houses were damp, and there were often no bathroom or running water. Cities were overcrowded and dirty, and poverty and unemployment were on the rise. There was no job security or social security for the factory worker. People were packed into cities. Men, women, and children spent their short and dismal lives working back-breaking shifts in unhealthy sweatshop factories. Before the Industrial Revolution, mercantilism, which is a command economy based upon the belief that there are a finite number of resources in the world, was the main way of thinking about business and the economy. During and after the Industrial Revolution, people started believing in economic choice and the people's ability to choose. This raised expectations concerning issues of quality of life. As this belief expanded, utilitarianism and socialism grew in popularity. Utilitarianism is the idea that all social, political, and economic models should be concerned with creating the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, and that all actions are right if they are useful or for the benefit of the majority. Socialism is the belief that true economic equality could only be attained if the workers controlled the means of production, as well as the distribution of goods. These two ideas were a reaction against the hardships of the working class and economic inequality of capitalism. People believed that competition would eventually reduce the number of capitalists controlling the economic system to a small minority of the large number of exploited workers rising up and overthrowing the small, very rich capitalist class. Then economic, social, and political equality could be achieved. Over time, reform legislation did increase the basic social, economic, and political rights of the working class. The environmental destruction, factory system, rapid urbanization, and changing ideas of business and the economy were some of the greatest effects of the growing population during the Industrial Revolution. These combined helped build a time of substantial change and industrialization, bringing to Europe and the world a new way of life.
Industrial Revolution definitely left its mark on the world. It changed not only so much with factories and transportation and communication, and so much more. It changed how many people are even alive today. It changed the way we think. It changed everything.
100 years after the onset of the Industrial Revolution, the human population grew 100% to 2 billion in 1927. During the 20th century, population grew to 6 billion people, a 400% increase in 1 century. In the 250 years since the Industrial Revolution, the total population has grown by 6 billion people. This immense population explosion has had a massive effect on the Industrial Revolution, and some believe the growth may have even caused it. From 1769 to 1830, the Industrial Revolution was confined to Britain. The exporting of machinery, skilled workers, and manufacturing techniques was forbidden. But over time, industrialization spread to other European countries, including Belgium, France, and Germany, and then to the United States. By the mid-19th century, industrialization was well established throughout the Western world, and by the early 20th century, the U.S. had become the world's leading industrial nation. The story of Britain's economic and industrial transformation in the 18th and 19th centuries is also the story of the fight for political and social rights in the face of change, a fight that continues to this day in many parts of the world. The many important and countless effects of the Industrial Revolution continue to influence the lives of every person, from now
economic procedures and I can't say.
The 1830s, before the Industrial
This was the first time in
service would take several months, and no one could be certain that the lever would reach its final. I said lever.
As term wages grew as a result of growing revolution and economic procedures,
Oftentimes, children were given the job of unjamming the great textile machines that wove fabric. Cloth.
Economic prosperity. Yeah, no, I couldn't even say that word.
Atlantic. Transatlantic. Okay, transatlantic. Transatlantic. Not Atlantic. Atlantic.
No.
Oh, transatlantic. Transatlantic. Atlantic. Transatlantic. Did I say it? Okay.
And economic procedures. Yeah.
This is where the fabric tended to jam. The forearm. The forearm, yes. The